Hello, Symposius. I'm Dr. Angela Puca, Religious Studies PhD and University Lecturer, and this is your online resource for the academic study of magic, esotericism, paganism, shamanism, and all things occult. Today, I have a very special guest that I'm very pleased to introduce to you guys, and that's Dr. Christina Oakley Harrington. Thank you so much for being here on Angela Symposium and accepting my invitation, Christina. Oh,
looking
sorry,
for a conversation.
Sorry, say that again. You were on mute.
I said, oh, I'm so looking forward to our conversation. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, I remember, and this is something that we will also mention during the interview, that I attended one of your talks at the Witchfest, which we were both invited at as speakers, and it was very interesting. And ever since then, I've always had it in the back of my mind that I wanted to invite you on. So, could you tell us a bit more about yourself and about your journey, given that you are, I mean, you have been in academia and then left academia, and you're open about the fact that you're a practitioner. So I think that a lot of people might be interested in your journey.
Well, I got involved in paganism in around age 22, 23. And I knew that was going to be my spiritual home. And I was also pursuing advanced degrees, which in there we're talking about the 1980s and early 90s. And so obviously those two streams of my life were completely separate. I was trained, trained as a medieval historian, early Middle Ages, and I did that at University College London, where I did my master's and I did my PhD. And my first degree was at University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And so then very, very quickly, just after, just went straight from a PhD into a lecturing post in the UK, teaching medieval history. I also was in the religious studies department, which is in the university was a Catholic university. I also taught in the Irish studies department. I was there for 11 years. And after 11 years, it was sort of clear to me that I didn't like having to live a split life. It felt very precarious. I loved the university I worked for. It was and is a marvelous place. But it was not a place that a pagan could be volunteering for the Pagan Federation and giving BBC interviews and be at the Catholic University. In those days, it was simply an impossibility. So I decided, what I would do is I would open an esoteric bookshop, which was a place that practitioners could be open about practitioners, scholars could be open about, meeting practitioners. And, the academic world could see that there were people who were pagan and magical practitioners who were, who also read books. Not all pagans are terribly bookish, but there was the idea at that time that if you were a pagan or you're a magical practitioner, that you were somebody who'd never opened a book and never thought critically about complex or nuanced religious ideas. And I knew that wasn't the case. I knew that wasn't the case. And I was very keen to make a space that would just be a space for conversation, but also for people to see things that they'd not seen before. And we've been doing that now for 23 years. We had our 23rd birthday on the 1st of May.
And tell us something about Treadwell's. It's based in London, isn't it?
Yeah, Treadwell's is a bookshop based in the middle of London, just behind the British Museum, around the corner from the Wellcome Institute, around the corner from the British Museum, and in the environs of University College London and the University of London Library. So we're right in the middle of research and ideas. And we sell books, we sell scholarly books, we sell practitioner books, we sell literature, we sell anthropology, and people in from all walks of life. That's what we do by day. And by night, we have a lecture series, which I've hosted since the year we opened. And I'll come back to that if you want. But so we do lectures, and we also then we started, of the most thoughtful, experienced practitioners in Western esoteric traditions, we offer classes and lectures and talk online and practical stuff in person. And it was really one of the most rewarding things is for somebody who's never touched magic and never thought they'd touch magic and perhaps had been a bit sneery in the past to say, well, I've come here a few times. You all seem quite sane. I think I'm going to go to, they're going to come to a candle magic class. Just to feel safe enough, that their credibility isn't going out the window, even though they're, up the road being, a scientific researcher at Wellcome. We just go, yeah, that's fine. Just have an experience. It's okay. It's okay. You're not losing your critical faculty. You see that those of us who are here are okay with it, and you're going to be okay. So I enjoy that very much. The other thing I've enjoyed is leaping back to the lecture series is I knew loads and loads of scholars who work on magic adjacent topics, and I knew loads and loads of practitioners who don't have access to their research and didn't have access to their research, not being able to go to the British Library or have access to university library, not even knowing how to navigate that. And so the lecture series from the beginning was aimed to say to the scholars, we would love you to come talk about this part of your research, but you must not be supercilious or sneery about people for whom this may have a personal meaning. They might take away what you know about the Greek magical papyri and apply it in a ritual and want to know and question you about how they, what offerings they should make or what the material is. And we'd love to have you speak, but you must be courteous about the practitioners. On the other hand, the other side, the practitioners in the late 90s and early 2000s were, to a large part, very anti-academic, almost like a reactive hostility. And for the practitioners, I said, you're welcome to come. We'd love to have you come, but you must not blame this scholar for not taking this material into their spiritual life. They can share stuff that's useful to you, but you must be courteous about them not taking it into their spiritual life. And everybody, so I was very clear about the rules. Now the rules are implicit, but I did have to give that speech many, many times, and it worked.
I think it's fascinating to hear your experience with that, because my experience has been a bit different, maybe because I've come later and people like you have paved the way beforehand, because in my experience it seems to me like the pagan community and the historic community is actually very keen on the contributions that academics and scholars can give, which I think it's incredible. That doesn't mean that academics should be the new dogmatic figures dictating people what they should believe. Of course, it's something that I always make very clear, and hopefully that comes across. But I think that it is still beneficial to have that information available, and then as a practitioner you can do what you want with it, but at least you know what the historical facts are, because in Wicca and in paganism, probably even more so in the past, it seems like a lot of practitioners were holding on to a mythology that was portrayed as history, but didn't quite match the history of Wicca. So what do you think about that? And how do you think that has evolved over time?
I think Wicca is a very particular case. The cases, for example, of somebody who might be a specialist in, I'm just making this up, but let's say the worship of Artemis in the ancient world. So somebody who's a dedicant of a god or goddess, or Dionysus or what have you, would learn so much from a scholar who's a specialist in that. Like, what offerings were made, how long were rituals, and what were the main holidays, and they can take that and use that because they're reflecting and adopting and modernizing for their own personal practice, things that only a scholar would know. In the case of Wicca, it's a very particular case. And the case of Wicca stands alone because of the whole history of the Western understanding of what witchcraft was. There was such a widespread belief, thanks to Jules Michelet of the 19th century French historian, that that witches were in covens worshipping the moon, and they were wonderful romantic characters who were, you know, just to be admired, and they were people who had fun when all religion was about shame. And, you know, that's not historically the case. And it was scholars within scholarship who established that, but they did not popularize that very successfully. You know, so the average person on the street, including the lay person who had no interest in religion, did believe that. The person who really took on the task of educating the pagan world about the true history of witchcraft was Ronald Hutton, who started that work in the 1980s, well, in the 1990s, and was a tremendous diplomat, tremendously ambassadorial and diplomatic to say, no, you know, the Wicca of today is not a survival of, you know, ancient covens that, you know, were worshipping the moon in the 16th and 17th century. But it's okay. Creativity is a wonderful thing. In the future can be much more healthy than the past. And we all have origin myths. And I do remember when he began speaking to pagan audiences, and I remember particularly going to a talk he gave in, I want to say 1990 or 1992. And the audience, you know, there was a large cadre of the audience that began protesting and shouting.
Really?
Yeah, at the back. And he persisted, you know, he really, really did persist and has persisted and became very, very loved. And people were able to appreciate, you know, what he said. You know, maybe you take away a myth, but you give an affirmation of how alive and present and creative religion can be, in this case, Wicca. So it's been a journey which I've mainly observed, not really contributed very much to, but I've been somebody who watched that happen over 20, 25 years.
That's incredible because, you know, the way that I've seen it, obviously, from a different generational perspective, is that he was actually quite loved in the pagan community. I'm Italian, so even in the Italian pagan community, he's quite loved by the pagans. So what do you think that allowed pagans to have a shift from, you know, the shouting and protesting to accepting him and even admiring him as a historian of paganism?
I watched him do this. I watched this all happen. I went to in the 1990s, I went to every pagan conference there was, just about. And I was immersed in conferences in those years. And what I saw was that one is that he went to the next conference, even after people at the back stood up and shouted, "You're wrong, you're wrong, you're wrong." I remember some women started like doing some dance to drown him out from the stage of this conference. But he was scheduled to speak at a conference like maybe some months later or weeks later. And did he cancel and disappear back into the ivory towers? No, he showed up. And he just kept saying, I'm a friend. I'm a friend. I'm not an enemy. I'm a friend. So he takes so much credit for persisting, letting people be angry and not reacting and still saying, I am a friend. That's one reason. The other reason, that thing that he did, and he gets all the credit for this, was to affirm that when that story wasn't the story that we all had, but the story that's true is even better. So there's something about when you disenchant people's, you know, I think, you know, and history, I mean, I'm trained as an historian. There's so many stories from history that are so meaningful to us in the present. And when those get taken away, it really hurts. And those can be national stories, they can be family stories, whatever stories there are. If you find out they're not true, there is a reaction of loss and pain. And if the person who's taken that story away says, but look, there's another story, and the story of what really happened is actually quite inspiring. And the story that Ronald Hutton gave to the pagans is not it remarkable that Britain in the 20th century, the generation of actually his parents and my grandparents, that generation formed the only religion that Britain has ever given the world. You should be so proud.
I love that. I think that it is something that, especially because I'm more in the field of anthropology of religion, not so much history of religion or history in general. But given that I'm in anthropology of religion, I do field work with practitioners and I attend rituals all the time. I'm constantly faced with practitioners. So, and I'm constantly asked by practitioners when I'm on the field, and my field work has been primarily in Italy. What do I think about the practices? And, they try to engage with me almost as a validating source. And especially when you're doing field work, obviously you want to be a blank slate. You don't want to participate as much. But I suppose my point is that I find that this is very interesting because in my case and in my research, I cannot abstain from interacting with practitioners. So it is whereas as an historian, perhaps you could choose to give talks as Ronald Hutton has done or not to. In my case, there is a constant interaction, and that means that I'm constantly faced with people being potentially disappointed when I publish an article and I propose my ethic perspective as opposed to the emic perspective, which is that of practitioners. So I can relate to that because it's difficult to navigate it. But at the same time, I also feel like I'm a friend. So it's like I'm not here to judge you or to I don't have a negative view of what you do, otherwise I wouldn't dedicate my life and my work and my passion to studying this. So but yeah, I think that it's amazing to hear how these things have evolved over time, because from the limited perception that I've had of Ronald Hutton in the pagan world, people always adored him and admired him. So it's so fascinating to hear what happened before. Yeah. Do you think that there are still pagan communities that are, how can I put it, hostile to the historical facts about Wicca?
Where one finds that is in the strand of witchcraft, which we would call traditional witchcraft. So the of whom the main writers are Andrew Chumley, Robert Cochrane, perhaps, Shani Oates, that world generally. And in that world, and not those authors, but in that world, are the late Michael Howard, who published Cauldron. And there is a hanging on, or there was for a long time anyway. Wicca was made up in the 1940s and 50s by Gerald Gardner and his friends. But if you go into the depths of Essex or Sussex or the Dales or Derbyshire, there's the real old covens where, the real things are. And my forebears or my teacher found them. So there's a dichotomy then between the fake newcomers, as it were, the newcomers who made stuff up, and the real old stuff, which we do, whoever we is. I like to think that has subsided, but it was very predominant division of us and them in the witchcraft community from the publication of Triumph of the Moon, 1999, maybe up until as recent as 5 to 7 years ago.
I think that I have heard of a few, especially American Wiccan priestesses that still talk about Wicca being the oldest religion. But yeah, it's I suppose that there are still people that perhaps hold on to that narrative. But as you said, and as Ronald Hutton has pointed out, I think that the truth is perhaps even better than that kind of mythological narrative.
Yeah, I would say that even in the what was actually being done in the early 20th and mid 20th century around that group of people for whom Wicca formulated, they were, the story that they, of what, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be articulate here. What they were doing and exploring and creating was not really a pseudo ancient thing. They viewed themselves as reviving something that was ancient in the way that archetypes are ancient. And if we read their letters, their story, that they have in their notebooks, and the way that they speak and the way that their interviews go, they're talking about something ancient, but they're speaking about it as ancient, going back to the caves, in a way that of human beings being primal and free and connected to nature. They're not saying that the words of making a circle and saying, nice words in each of the four quarters, that goes back to the Stone Age. I would say that group, which were quite remarkable and creative and bohemian and trying to reconstruct and make a living mystery cult, frankly, that they were making a pretend story and selling it as a pretend story. It got simplified as a pretend story.
And during the talk that I was mentioning at the Witch Fest, which I was attending with Ronald Hutton, by the way, who was also telling stories about the 90s when he first met you. You were talking about... Pardon?
He always tells the story about when he first met me. There was this young woman wearing a nose ring.
Yeah, and I'm wearing a nose ring.
I still have my scarf.
Well, I still have the ring.
Right, you're doing better than I am.
But your talk was very fascinating, and you were elaborating over Doreen Valiente and how she shaped the rituals of early Wicca. And during the talk, it was particularly about the winter solstice or the Yule ritual and the perception, the conceptualization of the god. Could you tell us a bit more about that? Because I thought it was very interesting, and I couldn't find any sources to use the material for an episode or anything.
Yeah, I mean, the work that I'm doing is not yet published, so it's coming out. I run a business as well as trying to write, but I had one of the things that one has happened in people looking at early Wicca is a tremendous focus on the ritual texts, and there are reasons for that. One is that the ritual texts are the things that have leaked out and become accessible in public, even though they were written and circulated for inside a gate-kept tradition. So obviously those are quite focused on, because those are the things that people can see. The other thing that people who focus on them are people who in the United States who are practitioners in that tradition, for whom the main thing that they received at the time of transmission of the tradition, 1960 to 1972, a lot of it, the tradition transmitted with a passing of a book of shadows and a little bit of experience, because it was a time when the tradition was trying to survive and multiply so that it could take root. So people were not spending 10 years in a coven before they would hive off and form their own. They might have been spending a weekend with their initiators. So when somebody has, and they want to go deeper in their tradition, what they really have is more like, in the United States, more like these texts, that they perform, rather than 10 years in a mystery cult experience. That's simplifying, and I have to go back a bit to say that. So the focus on the text is there. And the text is treated as though it is the core of the tradition. The truth of the tradition is found in these texts. And what is apparent to me from, shall we say, field work of 35 to 40 years with old people who were around Gerald Gardner and worked with him and are from that generation, was that the texts are the least important thing. They're an afterthought. And to give a tiny example, a midsummer ritual or midwinter ritual might have like maybe 10 lines of words, but the whole thing would go on for 4 hours. So if you've been at, I've been privileged to be, I grew up in West Africa, where there's drumming, there's trance possession, there's spirits coming in, spirits going out. There's times that people relax. There's times that people drink. There's times that they don't drink. There's, there's howling at the moon or whatever you're going to be doing. And this could go on for hours, right? And the number of set words that might be said or words that might be said could be quite small because the verbal part is very, very small. And certainly and this is what it was like in the maybe 1930s, but certainly in the 40s, 50s, and 60s in the UK before it spread out, to the US and other places, mainly saying, oh, well, here's some things you can say. And the poems that somebody might drop in that 4-hour period were here's a poem I like, at the height of the midsummer, at the height of the full moon, we do a trance possession, or we're going to call into a trance possession into the priestess or the priest, or we're going to, open up to the sky. Here's a poem I love. And because I'm in charge this time, you're going to say some lines of it. I'm going to say some lines of it. And we have a nice time. And maybe at the end of the day, we all go home, we crumple up that piece of paper and put it in the bin. But we all had an amazing time. And did we feel at one with the gods? Did we feel transported? Did we go into states of ecstasy? Did we feel wonderful? The purpose? Great. So we know that some of the people in the circle around Gerald Gardner and him himself absolutely loved Crowley's poetry, for example. So they would drop those in. But to come back to Doreen Valiente, there was the midwinter 1953, by which point that coven, the first coven, that group of friends, that loose group of friends that had kind of solidified and whatever, and they were there. Maybe they'd been going for 10 years, maybe 7, maybe 15, we're not sure. But Doreen Valiente went round to Gerald Gardner's flat, and this is her story. And she did write it in one of her books. So I went round his flat in the afternoon, and the coven was going to come round in the evening, and we were going to have the midwinter ritual. But midwinter was not a major Sabbath. So it was, there weren't any words, right? Of course, there was going to be a ritual, even without words, because if you're doing drumming, dancing, ecstasy, transpossession, you don't need a set text. But she said, well, what will we do? What will we do? What should be the theme, and how should we do it? And Gerald said, well, you write something. So she went to his bookcase. He was an avid reader, highly, highly, highly intelligent, well-read man. And she pulled off Carmina Gadelica from the shelf, and she found a Scottish Christian poem about the sun. And she wrote, a nice little invocation, a nice little goddess charge. And they did it. No big deal. This happened all the time. But the difference was that Doreen kept all of the scraps of paper rather than throwing them away. And Gerald kept them, and she gave them to Gerald. And so when people were starting up, say, I don't know what to do at midwinter, you go like, well, you could use this. And lo, they did. Fast forward to the time the Farrers are publishing, The Witch's Way or The Witch's Bible. This is the midwinter ritual. These are the proper words. It's completely understandable. We're a text-based society. We understand sacred text. We understand theology coming through text. This is Christianity. This is Judaism. This is Islam, text-based religion. So you want to understand a religion, you go for the text. So of course people are going to go for, well, what are the sacred rituals of Wicca? They've been leaked by the Farrers. Let me read them. Let me analyze them. Let me understand them. But for people who are in the alchemy of an ecstatic practice, as those of us in the UK are, we're just like, why are you fetishizing the thing that somebody did one afternoon on one theme thing and just happened to not throw it away? So it's, as an anthropologist, I'm very fascinated by your perspective on that, if you have anything to say.
Well, it reminds me that it's that lately have been teaching in universities in Italy. Obviously I moved to the UK for my PhD because it was not possible to do what I do and research what I do in Italy for reasons that are easy to imagine. But it seems like lately there is a rising interest in paganism in Italian universities, which I'm very pleased about. And so I've been giving a few lectures in the past couple of years. Just, last week I was at the University of Rome, and I've noticed that a common question that I get, and sometimes it is also from colleagues, not from colleagues that study paganism, but they perhaps study history of Christianity or history of religions. They ask me, how can pagans do rituals without a sacred text? So it is a common question that I get asked, and it seems like for some people they really struggle to understand how can you formulate a ritual without a sacred text, without a text that tells you what you're supposed to include and what you're supposed to exclude, and what are the things that will work, for whatever is the purpose of the ritual. So I think that's fascinating, and also it's one more reason as to why paganism is so fascinating to me, because it kind of breaks all the rules of the known religions or the popular religions that we know, because everything works in a different way.
It does work in a different way. It really does. And the parallel that I have found helpful is mystery cults, ancient mystery cults. It's not parallel in every way, but one of the aims of the mystery cult structure is for those people in it to be able to attain direct contact with divinity through being relaxed. So therefore the small group of people who know one another and trust one another. And to be not only relaxed, but to be unobserved. We all know, if anybody's ever tried to, relax enough to, I don't know, when you're observed, we know we unobserved versus observed is very, very different. So to be unobserved with people you trust, and to have access to drum, to sound, to voice, vocalization, the vibration of the body, and beauty, candlelight, incense, that to delight the senses in a way that daily life does not delight the senses. There's a taboo in Wicca that there's no electric light, and it's always at night. So what happens is our daily cares can fade away. And in that very, very otherworldly space, to hear beautiful words, and to have our hearts and our breathing, chanting, and in synchronicity, and for our, all the senses to be transported. In that state of transport, the aim is to achieve what the early Gardnerians called ecstasy. It might be a peaceful ecstasy, it might be a wild ecstasy, but to be at one with divinity. So the words are not important because the goal is clear. And I found that quite helpful with speaking with scholars, that the aim is clear. It's all about getting you to that state, and getting everybody to that state, to give one another. That's why covens, that's why it's a coven and not a workshop. So you get to know each other's sensibilities and how to make that work for the 6 or 7 or 8 of you over and over and over again. To know one's spiritual and almost physical responses to an environment, and to create that for one another so it can happen every time better and better and better. And, the premise, the theological premise is there is no part of us that is not of the gods. That's a borrowing from Crowley that the Gardnerians really loved at the beginning. Why should we not feel delight and joy and union? That's a birthright. That's a religious birthright. And they were reacting against shame-based Christianity.
That's beautiful. And I was just getting reminded that I heard a talk recently about sexual related practices in early Wicca, and the fact that they have been overemphasized and that they were more symbolic than factual. So do you know anything about that?
I do. My mentors were there.
Okay.
Those years are my people.
Good.
and I think we just go to the aim of early Wicca was to reclaim religion from shame. Right? And that there's no part of us that's not of the gods. And Edwardian Christianity in England was a lot about no sex before marriage, no sex outside of marriages, no polyamory, no homosexuality,
No pleasure.
no pleasure. The woman who got pregnant outside of marriage was a pariah for life. The straight couple who lived together without being married did not get invited to the neighborhood parties. To be divorced meant to be not invited to the neighborhood parties. We're not even talking about homosexuality and transness here. We're talking about straight people living under the veil of shame and staying within the bounds. Swingers parties were, which you sort of laugh about now. And I think most neighborhoods have some sort of swingers party or a swingers club. This was all happening very secretly, if it was. So when you have people in Wicca saying, well, there's no part of us that is other gods, including our bodies, including our sexuality, including like, what would it be like to not feel ashamed? Then, the space of the circle, the space of the night of the coven meeting was really important for them to be able to be naked. And if they wanted to, should we say in English terms, have a snog with someone or to spend the night with someone, that they had this community of trust whereby people could do that if they wanted to. And that's so hard for us to imagine that you would need to go to a secret place and be with people who you had established trust with, that weren't going to tell, that were not going interestingly enough, it's a priestess-led religion, and they were really emphasized that in the early days very strongly, and it's a goddess-based religion. And one of the things that I remember hearing and seeing, I was in my 20s and these people were in their 70s and 80s, was the way that the women could own desire. So it would be the woman who would approach the man for a kiss and a cuddle. And we have this idea that when something is, it must have been dirty men looking at the pretty girls. And it wasn't like that at all. It was a space where women could have desire and not be shamed. And the men could, perhaps not be considered dirty. I'm sorry, that's a very long answer, but it was more sexual then. But it was all part of that aim of reclaiming the body and joy and ecstasy for religion and for the goddess. To a certain extent, covens don't do that now because society changed.
Yeah, because we are less shameful about sex. Yeah. Well, to a degree, I think there is still.
You're in Italy, so to a degree, for sure. And one of the things that when I speak to people in coming into Wicca, coming into covens now, I say, okay, well, that was the circle, the coven, the meeting place, the Sabbath night was a space where they could feel without taboo and find their desires and find what they wanted. And the women could, gosh, I really fancy that man. I'm going to go over to him. And not just, be like this and wait for him to come to me, because that's how it was in the 30s, 40s, and 50s. A woman could not say, I desire you. So all this free space we call temporary autonomous zone. And so this temporary autonomous zone to explore parts of yourself that that society doesn't approve of. And so I ask young people now, what is that for you now? What is that for you now? What is this free space that society can't get into for? And they'll say, oh, I can't think of anything, but can I have my phone in the circle? And I'd be like, why? Why is that? Oh, because somebody might want to reach me. I'm like, okay. What would it be like if you claimed the next 4 hours and nobody can reach you and you're outside of time and you're away from texts? And nobody can phone you and see where you are. And they'd be like, oh, that would feel very taboo. And I say, that's why we do it.
Mm. So do you think that there is an antinomian element then of breaking social norms?
I think it's not to rebel, it's to reclaim. I know that when the full moon comes and I'm going and I leave my phone, I feel like I'm reclaiming time. Like nobody is allowed to reach me. I reclaim these 4 hours for myself, for my spiritual life, for my body, for my freedom. I'm not answerable to anybody for 4 hours. And I would say it feels naughty, but I feel the push. I'm not making a point against society. I just want this space for me.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And do you think that there was also an element of sexuality being, besides removing the shame, but also feeling like sexuality is an effective way to reach the gods, and perhaps were they a bit inspired by Crowley, for instance, or other?
Yeah, Crowley was, just a hero of that. He was for loads of people, but he was also for the people in Wicca because he put it in such beautiful poetry. If he did not put it in poetry, Crowley would not be in Wicca at all. But because his poems were good and they loved them, they aimed to be transported by his poetry, and they just picked the bits of his poetry which they loved, and they left out the bits they didn't love. So yeah, sex is very effective for having ecstatic experiences. Everybody knows that, religious or not. And so to have sexual experience as well as good incense and beautiful candlelight and some poetry and a good meditation and some fantastic drumming and dancing, it's just one of the things that you can do. Anybody in Wicca has known perfectly well it's very hard to relax in front of 8 people to have sex unless you're very, very extrovert. So they didn't, very few people did that. Because it's about the aim, and the aim is to feel free and at union. And for 90% of people who are not exhibitionists, you feel that in private. So yeah, people were doing a lot of, ecstatic sex work, almost always at home or in a private place with a person of their choosing. Because it wasn't about, now we're going to be in this place and to prove for the sake of ritual, we're now going to have real sex. It's not about proving a point. It's about, it was about what works for me. How and when do I feel like a powerful goddess? How and when do I feel at one with the stars? And how am I going to get that? With somebody helping me, either one partner or, in the case of group ritual, to always feel relaxed and happy and powerful in that space. So yeah, it's not going to look the same twice because you're trying to get 8 people to an altered state. Or if it's about sex, actually, I want to do that in private with this person. I'm not going to do it in front of 8 people, in a cold room in England. It defeats the purpose. It might be like, oh yes, that's written down there that's an option. Yes, we will do that this night. Okay, yes, I fulfilled the requirements of the ritual. It's not that shape.
Yeah, well, I think that sentiment is definitely something that I've seen in the Italian pagan community as well. I would say that the Italian pagan community is very sex positive, and there are events where you can see some action, and in Italy it's also warmer, so you don't have to be inside either. So but yeah, I think that even in that case it's from what I've seen, it's not something that is a requirement. It's more something that people that are willing to participate will, provided there's consent on every party involved, that's what happens. But it's a sort of a shame-free environment where people can experience what they want, really. So that sentiment is definitely reflected in what I've seen in the Italian pagan community. So that's interesting to see that. I don't know if you've ever watched a movie called The Love Witch.
I've not. It's on my list of films to watch. I believe the producers and the directors and the writers came to Treadwell's a few times while they were getting it together, because I know that I got an invitation to the premiere, which I couldn't go to when it came out. But I hear wonderful. It's very interesting, isn't it? I know the plot a bit, and I know the angle they were taking, and it is very interesting.
It is interesting, and I'm not sure if it is my interpretation, so it could be. So I'm not sure what was the intent behind us. I'm talking specifically about the ritual scenes, because there were some ritual scenes in the movie that seemed to be taken out of a Gardnerian Wicca, or similar to that kind of type of ritualism. And my perception was that there was a bit of a critique of that. To be fair, as I said, I'm not sure if it is my interpretation or not, but
no, I think it was. I think it was, and I think where they got that from was not from Treadwell's, because they would not have got that from here. But they got that from the internet ideas about Gardnerian Wicca, which I read, and I don't recognize the thing that I've been in for 35 years, and I don't recognize the thing that my initiators and my mentors and the old, the people who were in their 60s and 70s when I was in my 20s, who took me in, if you will, who mentored me and many other people through that tradition. They're not describing what they described living through in their generation. It really does come a lot from the internet, and a lot of people, many people on the internet have opinions about things that they've never had any contact with. And I understand Gardnerian Wicca is very private, because unobserved is the best way to have a completely relaxed, ecstatic experience. And so, stories get told. I hear they work naked. Oh, that, I heard that, Gerald Gardner was a dirty old man. I heard that, the boys look at the girls and so on. And I hear men are in charge, but they worship women naked. And it just truly does sound very sordid. I would be horrified. I would be a bit repulsed if I read that on the internet and didn't know anybody and wasn't in it for 35 years. So yeah, that was the Love Witch.
But I think the movie is interesting. I mean, it's aesthetically very beautiful, but at least the impression that I got looking at the ritual scenes and some of the ritual elements is that it seemed like the religion they were portraying was trying to portray itself as empowering to women while exploiting them sexually, because there's a scene where she gets initiated and there's a sexual element to that, and she doesn't seem like she's very happy about that, but almost as if she was brainwashed to feel that was empowering. That was my interpretation anyway. I don't know if anybody has watched the movie and you had.
I would. Yeah, the comments will be interesting. Gosh, I look forward to watching it. I look forward to watching it.
I convinced you to watch it.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, let me know what you think about it. Once you watch it, I really want to know what you think about it, because that's honestly the perception that I got. It seemed like, and obviously the protagonist is also a witch, but she is very manipulative, and she's not really a very positive character. She's somebody who ends up really harming people around her, and so I don't know. It's an interesting movie to watch, and it's very aesthetically pleasing. The colors are magnificent, and from an aesthetic point of view, is really nice. But it just doesn't seem to me like it gives a very positive impression of witchcraft or Wicca, because I don't think that Wicca is mentioned to my recollection. I don't think so. But the way that it is portrayed is really reminiscent of Gardnerian Wicca.
Yeah, I look forward to it. I mean, it is absolutely true that in every religion has its structural weaknesses for power abuse, and a coven structure is a difficult structure, and it is and any religion that has boundaries around secrecy is instantly more likely to be attractive to predators. So, it's, it is absolutely true that there have been, priestesses running covens who are horribly abusive and have wrecked the lives of people with them. It is absolutely true that there are men who infiltrate covens for the worst possible purposes and manipulate. It is absolutely true. I think it's best to be honest about that. I love my religion profoundly, and I've been very, very fortunate for the most part, but I have seen it. One of my closest friends is Catholic, and she has seen stuff in her tradition too that happens in a slightly different way because the Catholic Church is structured in a different way. But power abuse is real, and sexual power abuse is real. It happens in religious spheres, and it happens in non-religious spheres. One of the things I would love to see for scholars of religion and practitioners of religion to do, to become more educated about insidious grooming and spotting the non-obvious. It's like, we can all spot a groper, but the insidious infiltration of power abuse is something that I wish for all religions to understand better, and to have more education about watching while it is happening in early stages, and spot it and identify it and know what's happening. Because we're largely religious communities are very and community generally are naive.
And can you tell us a bit more about Gardner's and early Wicca's attitude towards homosexuality and the LGBTQ plus community? Because there's a sense that people have that Gardner was homophobic, and that early Wicca was not very inclusive in that regard.
One of the things that is so interesting for me is that every generation brings the agenda of its generation, and the agenda of our generation is LGBTQ and trans, which is wonderful. As an historian, we run into trouble when we ask people 200 years ago or 100 years ago or 70 years ago to have our concerns. The early Gardnerians did not think about homosexuality. They were not thinking about it. They were all they were mostly heterosexual. Not all, but they were mostly heterosexual. And their project was, and I think this is where we get the idea, it's heteronormative, at least. Let's say it's heteronormative, it's binary. There's a god and a goddess who are portrayed in a sexual dyad. And you take one look at that now, from where we are now, and say, oh my gosh, how oppressive to everybody who isn't exactly that. If we're in the 1920s or 1930s and 1940s, where the idea of what was sacred and what was God was, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was God, and God created by speaking, not even by having sex. And then God created Mary through no sex, and Mary created Jesus through no sex, and Jesus didn't have sex, and all of his priests don't have sex, and if you want to be holy, you don't have sex. And creation ideally should happen between two human beings, a husband and wife who are married, who are not enjoying it too much. Right? So their project was to reclaim from shame the fact that human beings are created out of at least one person's orgasm, on a good day, two people's orgasms. And this is just a fact on the ground. And isn't that holy? Isn't that kind of amazing? This is really how creation works, unlike that, which is shame-based. So I would say the project of their generation was to reclaim creation and life and the worship of life and the way life is made from that. Okay. And I would say the next generation, maybe now, is to say, well, let's take that principle to say the Gardnerian community, of which I am one. So they did that work. What's the work of now? Now that that's a fact on the ground for all of us. Shame around heterosexuality is largely gone in England anyway. So where does shame remain? And let's take up the next battle. Okay. And that is around, say, homosexuality, transness, poly relationships, to say just because it looks different doesn't mean it's dirty. And, there is no part of us that is not of the gods. Let's pick up and work on where othering and shaming is happening that we can see now. So, that is my answer to that. I would not, when the 98%, of which straight people are, the 98% is living under shame, and those people are in the 98%, they're going to do the battle for the 98%. And those of us who are in the 3% now can do the battle for the 3%.
So you don't think that, I suppose that saying that the LGBTQ plus was not really something that was in the mind of Gardner and the early Wiccans is a different topic from saying that the attitude that Gardner had was homophobic. So do you think that he wasn't homophobic? Because I've heard a lot of people complaining about the fact that Gardner...
Yeah, I know they complain about it, but he wasn't interested. He wasn't interested in gay people. He was not an anti-gay campaigner. He really was not interested. There were these small points, and it was true. He was not, there's one bit where he's a friend of his who worked with him, a priestess. She said, he did not like the idea of homosexuality. And she heard him say that. I have no doubt that was true. I'm sure that was true. What is also true is that one of his best friends was gay. And it's also true that there were gay people around his group who he was friends with, who came to the pagan stuff they did. And I know that through kind of, shall we say, family history. So yes, I would just say it's as though people are complicated. And the other thing I would put in that mix is that we call it Gardnerian, but not because he was the person who made it up and made a system. It's not like L. Ron Hubbard making Scientology, or Sri Rajneesh making the Osho movement. This is not a one-man created system. This is a group of friends who did it in a collaborative way, many of whom were women who said, "You must never mention my name." And he was the only one who was out. And he always only said, "I'm only a member. I'm only a member. I'm a member of a group." And he did hold to that. I've listened to every interview he ever gave and every interview he ever wrote. And he says, "I'm a member. I'm not a founder." And his magical partner was a woman. And she was a single woman who was raising a child off her own money. She was not independently wealthy. And she said, "You ever mention my name?" And the fact she was, in fact, integral to the formation of the thing. She said, "You mentioned my name, you've ruined my life." And he said, "I will never mention your name." So when people are, wanted to categorize this witchcraft, and the people started doing witchcraft in a different way, and they wanted to call this first way, if you will, by a name, they named it after him. He never called it Gardnerian. It was actually people who didn't like him who called him that. And he took it people took it because they said, we're going to keep the women secret because they asked for that. So he was not crazy about gayness. We don't know about the other 5, 10, 15 of them. They were pretty bohemian. The things that we knew that they did for ecstatic experiences in this mystery cult environment that was very, very private, some of it was pretty experimental. We know, a couple of them really loved magic mushrooms. We know that some of them were in polyamorous marriages, as we would call them now, trying to find new ways to be authentic and honorable, but not monogamous. We knew a couple of them were women, were very keen on exploring the sapphic side with other women. We know that there was a lot of very interesting experimentation with what we would call BDSM in private for altered states to achieve these states of union. They were very, very experimental. They were pretty out there. They were pretty bohemian, and I just can't think that you know, we maybe get this idea of somebody being very conventional and everything has to be done properly, and homosexuality is out there. These were not those kind of people.
Yeah. Also, Dr. Julia Phillips pointed out that homosexuality was illegal in the UK, and so given that they were doing rituals naked, they would have risked, having problems with the law if they were too open about including gay people.
Yes. Yeah.
So that's
they were keen to say, when they did do publicity, they said, we're not perverts. We're not perverts. To society, like, yes we practice naked, but we're not perverts. And they were really, they completely did not succeed in their generation of portraying themselves not as perverts, but they really were like, to be. Yeah, and homosexuality, absolutely, Julia's right. She's a friend of mine. She's absolutely right, and that's very well pointed out. We when you're saying you're not perverts, you also kind of want to say we're not doing things that are illegal. At least when you're pushed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. And moving on to the topic. Oh, before we move to that, there's a question that is relevant. So Sean is asking, how do you think Viviane Crowley's syncretism of ancient religions and Jungian psychology in Wicca Comprehensive Guide or other books has changed Wicca?
I think it's changed her practice, and it's changed the practices of the covens that she's helped found. So we can't, anything that's grassroots does not happen top down. But so amongst the people who are influenced by her or trained in her lineages, I think it definitely has, because she put that particular spin on it. One of the things I really love about what she has brought to the community is a strong but quiet voice of saying, look at yourself. We have to go within. So the emphasis of the earlier generations was so much on relieving oneself of shame, achieving states of ecstasy, having a profound experiences in the temporary autonomous zones, which obviously, she sees. And her refinements are a lot about, look at your dark side. Attend to, she works a lot with the 4 elements of earth, air, fire, and water, which the early witches did not. And she assigns them to the 4 functions. Look at your intellectual life, look at your emotional life, look at your practical life. So her contribution that I see amongst many is to attend to being whole and well and balanced. It's an incredibly valuable contribution, which is, I think, generationally appropriate. That she brought that in when she did, because poise-centered self-development is absolutely essential in anything that is looking for freedom and ecstasy, because that can be so out of control. And a tradition that's all about that needs to be tempered, and she's brought that in a profoundly wise way. She and her husband have a wonderful book that I'm always giving to people. It's called Your Dark Side, available on Amazon for 20p secondhand. It's not in print. Where they just say, look at the things you need to address within oneself that you don't want to look at. So the Jungian side, of how to look at one's dark side, how to look at the unacknowledged parts of the self, how to look at the potential that we all have to be abusers and manipulators. I'm a very, very big fan of her contribution. I think what can get lost, and this is not her fault, but in the watering down and the second-handingness of people looking at Wicca through the lens of her books, is people can come away thinking and have started repeating occasionally, oh, it is a self-centering system. No religion is a self-development system only. Oh yes, it's a Jungian way. You make a circle and look at your 4 elements, and you explore your dark side and your light side, and you explore your females, your woman side and your man side. To me, as a religious scholar, that is incredibly solipsistic. To just look at oneself. It is actually about attaining connection with something much bigger than all of us that should humble us and make us awe-filled as well.
Which is a good segue into my next question about magic. And I heard you say in an interview, which you didn't quite recall, but I've actually quoted you on that because I thought it was a good explanation of magic, which would be to make something less likely to happen, more likely to happen. So I want to know from you, how would you define magic, if there is, the way that you would define it, or whether there's some other way, and also the role that it plays in this religious endeavor that you were describing, this religious aim of going beyond yourself and having a connection with the divine.
I like the definition I gave off the cuff. I will remember it. Thank you. You've given it back to me. What I love about the way magic sits in initiatory gardening Wicca is that it is a reclamation of agency. And again, like, I am an historian, so I'm looking at the way Wicca was formulated among this group of friends in the, say, 20s, maybe 30s, certainly in the 40s and 50s, where anything in wider society, anything you wanted, you had to pray and hope that God would give it to you. And for my lovely Christian friends listening, please understand, I know I'm simplifying your very profound religion in a very crude way. But this was simplifying even their understanding. So part of the reclamation was we reclaim agency. Most religions have agency, whether it's the power of prayer or West African tribal religion that I grew up with, that there are people who make things happen. And you make things happen by first claiming that I'm going to act. I'm going to put my intention to this, and I'm going to make something, say something, do something that this happens. It's almost like you're telling your body and your voice that I really want this to happen. And to the point that I'm going to go collect rowan berries. I'm going to find some red thread. I'm going to tie 7 knots and say a word. And that can feel very, to this day, it can feel like, really, am I allowed to want something so much that I do this? And the body is going like, really, you must really want this if you're taking us on a walk to find these berries and you're doing this thing. So it's teaching the embodied self that you really care. And the embodied self, we believe in Wicca in the sense that the power comes from the body. And if the body knows, the body picks up coincidences, the body picks up opportunities. We hear the things we couldn't hear. That's even without getting into like directed energy. So the very act of performing a piece of magic is a reclamation of agency. And that can be, every time I've done like a charm or something for myself at home, I have to overcome this, like, really? Am I really doing this? I must really want this. This is, gosh, maybe if I don't do this, I don't have to think about how much I want this to happen. So it's as much as self-educating about one's subconscious as anything else. I mean, that's me. I'm not speaking for my tradition there, but I'm speaking for me as a practitioner.
Do you believe that magic is effective in altering our reality?
Oh, absolutely. The world is strange and people have strange capacities. I have a friend who dreams the future and keeps a dream diary. So like that, he does. I don't. I wish I did. Maybe I don't, but he does. My mother was had this tremendous ability. My mother was a very, very gentle person who loved animals. And I saw any animal that had recently died, little animals, little hamsters or birds, whatever. If she held it in her hands, it came back to life. And that's not strictly supernatural, but she really had that thing. And I do know of very, very strange healings where a coven will raise energy and send it, and somebody has a remarkable experience thousands of miles away. Not every time. So it's strange and mysterious. I leave it in the realm of the strange and mysterious. And being a witch is about being willing to enter into a space where we're going to be with the strange and mysterious.
Mm.
My answers around magic are absolutely not mechanistic. and I'll stand by that. Does it work?
Yes.
Does it work? I switch the light on, I switch my PC on. Does it turn on? Does it not? Magic, for me, magic does not operate in that binary of work versus non-work. It's about the world is strange, and when I'm doing magic in a Wiccan circle or at home, I'm up against and being infused by the strangeness of the unpredictability of weird things that might or might not happen.
Mm. So do you think that there are elements that make magic effective or more effective in terms of affecting your reality in the way that you intended to?
Yes, I would say whole body, voice, movement, touching, making. I think the more of yourself that is involved, your dreams, the senses, the smell, the taste, if the whole being is alive to that, I think it increases the probabilities of the unexpected happening. And I think people together, 100 people praying, I believe, is going to have a lot of power compared to one person praying. I think a person in a very deep state who prays a lot has the vibration coming off of them energetically is pretty. The one I'd ask to pray for me, if it was. I say pray because that's cross-cultural, but intent, sending energy for something to happen.
Mm. Do you think that
passionate, and caring and feeling free and love is so powerful. I really do think that the oxytocin waves coming off. And love is strange. Love is really strange. And
mysterious.
It's strange and mysterious, yeah. Maybe if I really wanted a spell to happen, I would have to get in touch with how much I loved the person, the animal, the thing, how it could help other people, and that is early Gardnerian, is that that magic rides on full body experience and love, that's why they say, coven has, there's a word in Wicca for covens, which is, a password into transformation is perfect love and perfect trust, which nobody can ever have. But if we're going to make remarkable things happen, it's when we're feeling love in a pure way and when we're feeling trust in a pure way.
Mm. And do you think that magic can be proven by science?
No.
We agree on that.
Oh, no.
I actually had a lecture for my patrons on that, but I think that a lot of practitioners would actually want that to be the case.
I think if we really, really want something to happen, I don't know whether it's getting a fellowship or getting into a doctoral program or getting a job, there's things like research the job, research the post, check the requirements, do the requirements, fill in the form on time, deliver the application on time, prepare for the interview by watching how to interview Zoom well. For things to happen in the world that we want to have happen, there's 90% of it is stuff that we do in the world. And for sickness, healing, and death, which is, so profound, death is incredibly hard. Death is so painful, and illness and pain and chronic illness and terrible things. They're horrible. They're horrible to suffer through. Since time began, they're part of the deal of being on the planet. And we do our best to make them better. Scientists and medics and healers and witches and praying Christians all do our best to mitigate suffering with what skills we have. So I feel we're all on the same side.
Mm. And why do you think that magic cannot be proven by science?
Because the variables can't be replicated and the results can't be replicated. So my mother was a scientist, so like I'm going to have to say, do you have replicable results? And there are loads of things that don't have replicable results. So like, can you set up a dating agency where everybody will match with somebody and you can predict that? I mean, that's not religious, but it is also completely unpredictable.
Mm. Harold was asking, do you think magic can be proven math?
No, I barely made it through math class, so I'm the wrong mathematician to ask.
And Sean was asking, do you see Wiccan witchcraft as a form of theurgy?
Yes. Yeah. It has a number of aims, but one of them is theurgical. Yeah. Self-transformation to become at one with divinity. That's one of its aims. The other part of its aims is that it is coven-based, and so it is built to make community, friendship groups, alternative ways of being in the world as somebody who maybe lives and feels differently, but you know that you have a coven of people who hold your back and keep your privacy and are there for you. So it's also, there are many strands, one of which is to make another quasi-family structure that can support individuality. And it was also aiming to reclaim agency in magic, which theurgy does somewhat, but not entirely. So it has a theurgical strand, which is, I would say, central.
Mm. That's great, Christina. I think that we are approaching the end of our interview now. Is there anything that I haven't asked that you want to cover or talk about?
No, just to say, like, please send me magic for finishing my books. I've just come back from a lovely residency at Harvard, where I was surrounded by beautiful scholars who gave me loads of encouragement, with whom I had amazing discussions, and including an anthropologist working in Italy, Dr. Parmigiana, and
Giovanna. Yes, I know Giovanna really well. She's a friend.
Absolutely wonderful scholar of South Asian esotericism and magic as it links to the West as well.
Keith Cantu,
who is a wonderful, has been a wonderful friend to me, and so it's been such a privilege to be surrounded by scholars of such sensitivity and insight for such a period of time. And I've come back to run a bookshop, and I'm making space to finish for publication. So anybody wants to send me good vibes, please do.
We will. And is Treadwell's what are the opening times, in case people want to
come visit us? We're at 33
I want to
definitely
come.
Yeah, in the middle of London, and we're open every day of the week, but starting in July, we're going to be closed on Mondays, so I can finish my book. So every day of the week except Monday, just come anytime. It's a friendly place. It's full of great books. And we also have online lectures, online classes, things in person, book launches. So we're very, very accessible and fully inclusive, and have a zero tolerance for transphobia or homophobia or racism, which is on every ticket that anybody will ever receive. We're officially named by Camden Council as a safe space when people are being harassed in any way to do with that. So we have a little rainbow on our window as a safe sheltering spot. So however people look, feel, love, and identify, like, it's a safe space.
That's lovely. Thank you so much for being here on Angela's Symposium, Christina. It was lovely, and I definitely hope to meet you in person at Treadwell's or in other or Witchcraft, yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you everybody who's listening as well. And thank you, Angela, for having me. And thank you for such a wonderful conversation. What a privilege. And thank you for what you do. I've loved the conversations of yours that you've had on your podcast. And there's such a contribution to thoughtful and personal engagements with these subjects.
Thank you. Yeah, I just part of my project is really bridging the gap between academia and the community of practitioners, so that on one end I can offer peer-reviewed scholarship in an engaging and fun way to the public, because otherwise it's pretty much inaccessible to people, and also to bring, you know, scholars like yourselves and even practitioners, so that people are exposed to different types of beliefs and knowledge. And you know, hopefully that makes our community a little bit more informed about everything that is going on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Christina. So I'm gonna close the live stream, but please stay on, don't leave the studio so that we can have a chat afterwards. And thank you again. So also thank you to Andrew and Edward. I saw that you were moderating the chat, so thank you so much. And to all of you here, I really hope that you enjoyed this conversation. And if you did, don't forget to smash the like button. And also, I'd like to remind you this project is crowdfunded by you guys. So if you want to support this project, please consider doing so on Patreon. Coffee, obviously Patreon is one of my favorite ways, because you will also join a fantastic community. We have a Discord server, monthly lectures, and lots of academic fun there. So please do sign up, consider signing up for my Patreon. But there are many other ways to support me, and you can check out my services on drangelapuka.com, my website. You find all the links in the bio, info box, a pinned comment everywhere. So thank you so much for considering. And also, again, smash the like button if you like this interview. I'm sure you did. Let me know in the comments what you thought about what we said, whether you have any comments, any questions for Christina or for myself. Please let me know and share this video around so that the symposium can grow and more people can be exposed to the fantastic knowledge that Christina has generously offered us. So thank you all so much for being here, and I really hope that you stay tuned for all the academic fun. Bye for now.